Hello everyone, it's Laffy Traffy. We are here now to talk about chapter 1018 of One Piece, titled Jinbe vs. Who's Who. Solid name for a solid chapter with a lot of, you guessed it, Jinbe action as we get the finale, I hesitate to say, but it looked like a finishing blow to me as Jinbe finishes off Who's Who, and we get some lore drop once more about the Sun God. Lots of things to talk about. Last chapter we left off on a lore drop in of itself about the possible important origins of the Gum Gum fruit and how it was guarded by CP9 and how Who's Who was an ex-CP9 agent. Lots of stuff. But before we get into it, you can check me out on Twitch and Twitter for more gaming, anime, and One Piece content if you're into that. I do live One Piece reactions to the chapters Fridays at 12 p.m. on Twitch, so go follow me over there if you're interested in that. And if you haven't checked out my reaction, feel free to check that out too. I feel like I'm talking really fast. Am I talking really fast? I don't know why. But with that all out of the way, let's dive into chapter 1018 of One Piece, Jinbe vs. Who's Who. The chapter starts off with the reactions as all of the gifters are now fighting on the Allies' side, and that number is 300 gifters. Not as much as I thought. I thought there'd be maybe more considering there's several thousand, tens of thousands of fighters right now, but 300 gifters are at least the amount that Tama was able to give a dongo to, along with Daifugu, Speed, Gazelleman. All of them were giving out dongos, so they managed to sway 300 gifters over to their side, which is still a lot considering the gifters are weighted more in terms of combat power. But a lot of the rest of the fighters are catching on that this little girl made a message and now our teammates are turning on us. I feel like she's the problem. So they start targeting her. Usopp and Nami take her and run away. But Daifugu-sama saves them and he gives a little thumbs up, which is cute, as Speed rushes over and Gazelleman mentions that Komochiyu is safe with them and that everything's under control. I gotta say, this is a broken power, as Nami points out. Like, this is an amazing power to not only flip sides of someone, but also now have a bunch of guards around as she's making her way safely through the castle now. I'm just gonna say, that's pretty overpowered. In this specific instance, where there are specifically artificial devil fruits around. After Nami comments on such an amazing ability, Zeus pops out in cloud form. So maybe that'll be the form that Zeus usually communicates in and that we'll see him most often in rather than the Climatact. But he asks if maybe Nami has forgiven him and wants to be her servant. And at first Nami declines and we're wondering what happened, but she says maybe we can just be partners instead. And Zeus flies through saying, yeah, Nami's partner, my friend. Somewhere Sanji heard Nami's partner and is just going insane right now. But we go back to all of the gifters fighting and we get an announcement through the walkies that 1,000 additional fighters have switched sides. I don't know if I'm the only one confused about that, if they are just choosing to switch sides because they're following the gifters who, it says subordinates. So are the gifters persuading their subordinates to fight on their side? I feel like it would take a lot more than just some gifters to sway 2,000 soldiers over to the Allies' side. I mean, it happened with Queen and Chopper and everything earlier, but they had a specific reason to switch sides. So I am wondering why we don't get more explanation as to why these 2,000 soldiers have just switched sides because the gifters have? I don't know. But regardless, that takes us down to a 16 versus 9 ratio of the Beast Pirates versus the Allies. We get this information from another sneak peek, once more, of the CP0 agents, all playing on their Go board as they're flipping over all of the pieces to more accurately represent the battlefield. And it's just under a 2-to-1 ratio, so that's a pretty impressive flip with all the casualties and everything going on. So I mean, if you were still unsure of how the raid was gonna go, I think this is definitely pushing us in the correct direction, unless of course we get some other crazy twist. Not saying that there won't be. I'm just saying, at this point, seems like it's a pretty solid deal because we're gonna get Luffy back soon. We don't get Luffy in this chapter, unfortunately, but it's still a great chapter overall. We hear the CP0 commenting on how they don't care about the victor of this battle. So they don't care if Luffy survives or if Kaido survives. Either one, they don't care. They are interested and invested in the demise of Who's Who. It makes sense that the CP0 really don't want a rogue CP9 agent to continue living because some secrets that they might have, but they even say themselves that his survival and the information he has is probably mostly outdated, and so that it won't really hurt the government. It's just a matter of their code to not let a survivor go. Didn't work out with Robin, so maybe it won't work out with Who's Who, but I don't really care because Who's Who's not that great, so if he dies, he dies. If Jinbe ends him, fine. If the CP0 end him, fine. If he gets away, fine. I don't really care. We get all we need from him in this chapter, and it's not great. You know, the fishmen racism part, in case it were unclear. Speaking of the devil, continuing on, we see Jinbe and Who's Who just going at it. They are swapping blows. We get more of his fang pistol and a lot of cool moves as Jinbe's blocking it and getting hurt, and really awesome action panels here as his attacks are going through the floor onto like the subordinates down below, and they're like, oh my god, what's happening? But Who's Who states specifically that it was red-haired Shanks that stole the gum-gum fruit, which we figured that. And he clarifies that it's not Luffy particularly that he has the grudge against, it's just his association with the gum-gum fruit and with Shanks that he's also petty about that. I mean, he sees the straw hat, he sees the gum-gum fruit. Anyone could guess that he has some sort of connection with red-haired Shanks, and red-haired Shanks is what was the fall of Who's Who, so he's like, you know what, while I'm here, I'm gonna get back at that straw hat kid to get back at Shanks. Which is fair, I understand that. Especially since Luffy's like the embodiment of failure with the gum-gum fruit, so you know, you can't blame him, but Jinbe is in the way, so he will not be getting to their captain. But moving on from the gum-gum fruit, unfortunately we don't get any more information or clarification. I was really interested in how much Who's Who knew about the gum-gum fruit. Did he know why it was special? Was he in on the mission, or was he just told, you know, you have an assignment, guard this devil fruit? And maybe he doesn't know the significance of it. I really wanted to know his perspective on everything, if he did know or if he didn't, but that will hopefully be explained at a later time, a much later time, because there is a break next week. But we move on to a different sprinkle of lore here, where we talk about the sun god Nika and his possible relation to the sun pirate. Who's Who is definitely not doing himself any favors here, as he makes derogatory remarks towards Jinbe as a fishman and all of these awful things that if I wasn't sure about my feelings about Who's Who, as he, you know, because I don't necessarily hate Alt-T or Page 1. No, they're just the beast pirates and whatever. You know, there was no personal resentment towards them. But here, Oda is making sure that we want to see Who's Who defeated. And it is oh so satisfying when it happens. And Jinbe is the perfect person to deal with someone like Who's Who, because he's just stoic and he keeps his calm, at first at least, where he doesn't really respond, he doesn't get into an argument, he just says, I don't really have anything to say to that. You know, it's 2021, alright? We can do without the shitty remarks about him being a fishman. Like, come on. And Who's Who isn't even apologetic. He's just like, huh, my bad. But hey, there's also something else I want to use you for. I think you have information that I really want, and I don't really care about you or anything that you personally have to do with this subject. And they're fighting throughout this exchange too, which I just have to say that I think my favorite panel of this entire chapter is when Jinbe braces for impact against his charge attack, wraps his arm around the fangs, and shoulder throws him. Shoulder throw is arguably Jinbe's best move, but holy shit. He just slams him into the ground, and it is great. God. Who's Who, though, continues as he brings up a certain legend that he as a prisoner was told that slaves used to worship and pray to for them to be brought salvation and be saved from their situations, and that is the sun god. And he was wondering if because fishmen also have a history of slavery and the fact that they were named the Sun Pirates, if there was some connection with the sun god. And though those are pretty decent connections on Who's Who's part, they're just kind of rude. Who's Who clearly does not care about Jinbe or his history. He's just asking a selfish question because he was told this story in prison that he took very seriously. It was the reason he said that he broke out. So he obviously took this story very seriously. So for his own self-interest, he's asking if Jinbe would just tell him the whole story about the history of the fishmen and the sun pirates. Like, come on. He's just insensitive about it. He's like, well, I don't know, aren't you fishmen, like, you're basically just all slaves, right? And you're named the Sun Pirates. Are you like, do you happen to know about the sun god? You know, I bet you do. I bet I know everything about your history. What's it about? Tell me, I want to know. He's like the shittiest bully who wants something but insults the person that he wants information for as he goes just because he's that insolent. I think that's the best word to describe Who's Who in this situation, is just insolent. And no shock, Jinbe doesn't take kindly to being told all about his history of slaves and like, oh, the fishmen are all the same, all your histories, we know everything about it, it's not significant, it's not personal, all these awful things, and so Jinbe's getting pissed. Whether or not that's because Who's Who was accurate in declaring that the sun god does have to do with the sun pirates' history and fishmen in general, or if it's just because of his shallow connection that Jinbe's like, oh, just because those two things somehow connect in your head, you're just assuming that it has to do with fisherman history. That's rude. I think it's more of the former situation though, because he gets very mad, and if the fishermen did worship a sun god, it was probably very personal and very significant to their history, and to have some enemy just casually throw that around because he heard it this one time, it would probably grate on his nerves a bit, and it does, because Jinbe turns on to like rage mode. He's tanking all these finger pistols and these intense attacks, and Jinbe just braces himself, and he defends himself so well that Who's Who's finger breaks. Both of his fingers for finger pistol, which, you know, armament hockey, all of this stuff, like the finger's pretty strong. But Jinbe just blocks through it and breaks his fingers and then grabs his hand. I have to mention that it looks a lot like Conqueror's Hockey. I feel like it would have been a bigger moment if it was actually Conqueror's Hockey, so this is probably just his depiction of crushing, almost like Whitebeard, his crushing grip as he goes in for the attack against Who's Who. But there's 3 separate panels where this lightning is coming off of Jinbe's attack, so if it is Conqueror's Hockey, I'm all here for it. I am all here for Jinbe having Conqueror's Hockey. Jinbe has been through so much. He's always been, to me, not a level above the rest of the Straw Hats, but in his own division, we might say. Like, he has the history and the knowledge, the strength, the experience that definitely exceeds most of the Straw Hats. Not necessarily in power. I'm not gonna power scale Jinbe right now, but I do hold him to a higher tier, you know, compared to most of the other Straw Hats, as, you know, I'm sure most of you do. So to see Jinbe make easy work of Who's Who as he goes in, tanks another attack that Who's Who was bragging about earlier, about like, ooh, good thing you dodged my fang pistol, otherwise you would have been eaten up and immediately killed. And Jinbe just takes it. And it shatters on impact as Jinbe is just holding his ground. And with a beautiful finishing statement of not taking other people's histories lightly and not being half-assed about it, Jinbe delivers a final gargoyle tile fist attack right into Who's Who, and all the subordinates around are like, Who's Who, no! woo! So this whole scene, this full 2-page spread about it, and then the end panel where Jinbe's just, whew, that felt good. All of this indicates to me that this was a finishing blow, and that is a wrap-up to Who's Who versus Jinbe. Roll credits, name of the chapter. So overall, my prediction is that we're going to get, the next few chapters are going to be focused on the Toby Robo fights. Maybe even each chapter will be named, like the next one might be Sasaki versus Frankie. Next one after that might be Black Maria versus Robin. And Brook, I don't know if Brook's going to have another fight on his own, but I think he has a pretty good place next to Robin, so maybe that'll be what it's titled. Black Maria versus Brook and Robin. But I think we might be getting some consecutive chapters about the finishing blows of the Toby Robo fights so that we can hurry along the final fights with Zoro and King, assumably, Sanji and Queen, and then Luffy and Kaido. And Big Mom with Kid and Law. That somehow gets pushed off to the side in my head. That shouldn't at all be pushed aside. It's Big Mom and two of the greatest characters ever. So yeah, we're in for a lot of fights. And I'm not necessarily hoping that the Toby Robo fights are rushed because I want some Black Maria and Robin action. But I think that it would work really well for pacing if the next 2 chapters focused on those 2 fights in order, so that we can get them out of the way and feel some good conclusions as Robin beats down Black Maria, probably. Maybe we'll get 2 chapters each, I don't know. So after the chapter is concluded, the biggest glaring thing of this chapter, after Jinbe's victory, is of course Sun God Nika. The silhouette, as I even first reacted to it, reminded me a lot of Skypiea just because of the clothing that they were wearing. It reminded me a lot of the Shandorians. And I'm sure you've all seen by now all the different panels that people have been gathering together to show different mentions of the Sun God and different, specifically like Skypiea, so you know that connection's there. But the main candidate for the Sun God is possibly Joy Boy? I'll admit, when I first read through the chapter, my initial reaction was that this was an entirely different entity, with the fact that it had his own name, Nika, and that it was a god, which Joy Boy has not been portrayed as at all up until now, possibly. I had the impression that the Sun God was something else and that Joy Boy was separate, that maybe the Sun God was some form of legend surrounding Fisher Tiger maybe, but the silhouette just doesn't match up. But I'm still not entirely convinced that the Sun God is Joy Boy. I'm kind of stuck here because on one hand, it does make sense because we've been talking about Joy Boy, the Gum Gum Fruit, Luffy. That's been such a theme in Wano that it's like, oh, Sun God, cool title, brings joy to people. Seems like it would be Joy Boy, you know. It's kind of obvious, almost. But on the other hand, is it too obvious? And we've never heard of Joy Boy being considered a god, that I know of at least. And he has its own name, so it makes me just hesitate a bit to put all my eggs in the basket of the Sun God is Joy Boy. Not to say that I'm against the idea, because that would be pretty cool that this figure, you know, much like religions of today, you know, there's one thing that happens and then a bunch of different religions have different stories of that same occurrence, writing it into their own mythos. This might be something similar, where Joy Boy was this great figure and the fishmen, as they were slaves, held on to this and kind of wrote their own story surrounding Joy Boy, whereas a lot of other people entitled him the Sun God. And then meanwhile, maybe other people on the surface had a different interpretation of the same person, Joy Boy, and named him Joy Boy. Or maybe they're both wrong, and it's somewhere in between that the actual figure of Joy Boy was. But regardless, we're just gonna have to wait for more information about that. It's just fun to speculate about all the things that could be happening, because with the last lore drop, with the talks of Joy Boy, and now the Sun God, there are a lot of things getting dropped on us, and we are just so desperate for answers of years and years and years of One Piece lore and world building that is so rich. We are just consuming all of it immediately. We're going to be stewing in our theories and ideas from this information for at least 2 weeks, probably more, because from the looks of it, Who's Who might not be the best person to be talking about this right now. Maybe we'll get some exposition from Jinbe if someone overhears or saw what happened and they're like, yo, Jinbe, so why'd you get so mad when he asked about the sun god? Was there really a sun god? Who was that? And maybe we'll get Jinbe a little exposition. Maybe. But let me know in the comments below if you do think that the sun god is Joy Boy. I want to know if everyone's kind of thinking that, or if it could be a different figure, if the sun god might be someone more related to fishmen. A lot of people brought up the silhouette of Luffy dancing in Skypiea, which is a very similar silhouette to the sun god. Take that what you will. If Luffy's going to be Joy Boy, then he might as well be the sun god too, right? Just slap all the titles on him, yep. Overall, I really enjoyed this chapter, and it was amazing to see Jinbe as an official Straw Hat member punch down an important figure and contribute as a true member. It's a first. Take a moment to embrace that this is the first fight of Jinbe as a Straw Hat Pirates. It only took 10 years, 10 plus years. It's great. Lots of action, lots of things to think about, perfect One Piece chapter. So leave a like if you also enjoyed this chapter and you liked what I had to say, and make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet, if you liked anything that I had to say, or any of my other videos that you've watched up till now, or if you haven't, go watch them, they're fun. Again, check me out on Twitch and Twitter for more One Piece gaming and anime content, and specifically on Twitch if you want to catch my live reactions to chapter 1019 in 2 weeks' time. That wraps it up for my review, and until next time for chapter 1019, have a great day, follow your dreams, and check me next time. Bye!